Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man? The battle of the century? Well, kinda. Stay tuned for the video.
Anachronic.
Hi comic book guys and gals, I'm Joe, and welcome to Anachronic Comics. Now, in today's video, let's visit the greatest superhero team-up of all time. The treasury-sized edition of Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, jointly published by Marvel and DC back in 1976. Now, I have a number of treasury editions in my collection, many of which were given to me by my best friend John after he bought and read them. Now, I'm not sure if this particular one is one that John gifted to me, but it might have been. Now, back in late 1975, when the comic book fans heard that this joint Marvel-DC comic book was coming out, it was an event we never expected. The title of this comic book could easily have been DC vs. Marvel, which actually came to be a little bit later on, but that's another story. Now, the late 1960s and early 1970s saw a tremendous rivalry between Marvel and DC that began when Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and others brought out titles such as The Fantastic Four, The Avengers, and Spider-Man. As these comic books and characters brought what we readers at the time saw as real-life situations, DC was slow to respond, with many of their titles mired in a formulaic storyline that did nothing to excite readers. The rivalry grew to such a point that each company pilfered talent from the other. And they published such titles as Not Brand Ek, I think that's how you say it, and The Inferior Five, poking fun at the rival company. So with such a rivalry, how did this collaboration get done? Well, the seed was planted when DC and Marvel discovered that each was separately working on a comic book version of The Wizard of Oz. Now, realizing that it made little sense to publish two similar comic books at roughly the same time, the two companies decided, hey, let's work together. So they joined forces and published the comic book. Amazing. But it showed that it was possible for the companies to collaborate on a project, notwithstanding the considerable rivalry, which I may add, from a personal standpoint, I didn't much see with my friends in the 1960s. Now, sure, we may have had our favorites. Mine was the Justice League of America, as you may know. But we read and collected comic books from both companies. I have two videos on my Amazing Spider-Man Silver Age collection from the 1960s, and I'll link to them at the end of this video. So the companies can work together if it's in their financial self-interest. So how did Superman vs. Spider-Man come about? Well, it depends on which story you want to believe. Fans kept clamoring for a cross-company comic book, and Stan Lee recognized the power of the fan base, indicating that the letter sections of his comic books gave him the path he would follow by seeing what the fans wanted. Now, one of the precursors to the New York Comic Con was the Comic Art Convention in New York City. As the story goes, there was a joint Marvel-DC editorial panel at the 1970 Comic Art Convention, and a fan asked the editors whether they would consider a jointly issued comic book. The editors basically scoffed at the fan, indicating that such things like copyrights and other reasons meant a comic book like that would never happen. Certainly, the rivalry was also a reason, although not one that was voiced by the editors. Supposedly, this question planted a seed that eventually resulted in the companies working together on this book. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. However, the actual proposal was initiated by a literary agent named David Obst. Back in 1974, Obst was having lunch with Stan Lee and asked why Marvel and DC hadn't done a crossover. He he mentioned that DC had already done an internal crossover with Earth 2, beginning with the Justice League of America number 21, so that the logistics had been taken care of. Supposedly, Lee said he would love to, but he cited the rivalry between the parties, that because of that, he knew DC would never go for it. Well, Obst was a man who got things done, and actually got Carmen Infantino, then the publisher at DC, to agree. Now, it's been reported that Stan was still not keen on the idea, but was convinced to do so by Roy Thomas, and the project moved forward. Here's a quote by Stan the Man that appears in Superman vs. The Amazing Spider-Man. "We knew we couldn't keep our top heroes apart much longer. Readers everywhere were demanding a team-up of the best of the old and the best of the new. Superman, the first, most powerful, most famous caped crusader of them all. And Spider-Man, the newest, most realistic, most popular wall crawler on the scene today. Both together in one titanic, unforgettable adventure." DC and Marvel split the duties, with DC naming the writer and Marvel the artist. DC selected Jerry Conway to write the story. Conway was working on the Superman title at the time, but also was familiar with Spider-Man. He had actually taken over the writing duties on Spider-Man in 1972 from Stan Lee. So it's somewhat interesting that Conway had left Marvel in 1975 for DC, so he was part of the rivals snatching talents from one another. Now, Marvel picked Ross Andru, who had been drawing Spider-Man, as the artist, with John Romita Sr. Designated to draw Peter Parker. Dick Giordano of DC was selected to be the inker. Now, apparently there was quite a bit of arguing between the creative teams, with each team trying to ensure that their character was not slighted in any way in the final drawings or story. So this led the companies to add Roy Thomas as a consulting editor to effectively be the mediator. With Roy involved, the two sides agreed that both Superman and Spider-Man would get equal time, and the story would not highlight either Marvel or DC Universe heroes. This, I believe, resulted in what ended up being a somewhat unique structure to the story. So before we look through the book and its structure, here are a few interesting facts. First of all, the story just assumes that both New York City and Metropolis, and thus the heroes, appear on the same Earth. Now, Jerry Conway understood this issue, but said in an interview that he was just trying to make a fan-favorite story and have fun. Second, although John Romita Sr. was officially brought in to draw Peter Parker's face, in effect, there was a DC artist who redrew Superman without the permission of DC or Marvel. As I mentioned, Dick Giordano was the inker, and at that time, he was working with Neal Adams at Neal's Continuity Studios. When Ross Andru's art was delivered to Dick for inking, Neal took it upon himself to redraw the Superman character, and he did this throughout the book. This was confirmed by Giordano in an interview, who noted that he didn't say anything about it at the time so as to not disrespect Ross Andru. So let's take a look at the book. As I mentioned, the story structure is a bit unorthodox, as I believe you'll see. Also, the story is not considered part of either hero's continuity. Now the cover, take a look at the front, and take a look at the back. Poster size, right? So the cover is one of the most iconic in comic book history. The layout was done by Carmen Infantino, with the final art by Ross Andru and inks by Dick Giordano, and the little bit of Neal Adams there on Superman. Now, we'll see exactly how Infantino created the layout in a few minutes. At 96 pages, it was 4 times the length of a regular comic book, and I believe that the price at $2 was 8 times the price of a regular comic book. So this was a very significant and expensive comic book for the fans at the time. Now, there are 3 prologues totaling 38 pages that kind of act to set up the story. I believe this is probably part of the agreement not to have one hero outshine the other. Now, before we continue, I want you to take a look here at how these staples are set up. One there, one set here. The cover is glued and it's not detached or anything like that, but it looks like the staples were put right into these areas. And the staples don't go through the cover. See? So, if any of you guys have a copy of this, I really would like to know whether yours has the same staple situation that mine does. All right, because that's a little bit strange to me. And because of that, I'm going to be gingerly turning the pages so that I do not in any way rip the book or detach the cover with respect to that. Okay, so let's begin. Let's take a look first at the page here. And here we have a soliloquy by Stan Lee and a comment from Carmen Infantino. And this soliloquy is where I had that quote that I earlier had given from Stan with respect to Superman and Spider-Man getting together, you know. And Carmen Infantino was a little bit more direct with respect to, not as flamboyant, of course, as Stan, but basically he indicates who helped get the thing done. He mentions all the names, and he says that this is a pleasure that's before you. All right. So his dedication, though, goes more directly to the greats of yesteryear and today that make comics a true art form for tomorrow. The moment is now. Let's begin. Carmen Infantino. So Stan Lee, Carmen Infantino. And as you can see at the bottom here, I'm not sure how good it is as you can see it, but I'll try to zoom in on this video when I edit it. It says Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, published by National Periodical Publications, Inc., which is what DC's name was at the time, and Marvel Comics Group. All right. And on this side here, you see the people who are given the credit. It was presented by Carmen Infantino and Stan Lee, written by Jerry Conway, drawn by Ross Andrew, inked by Dick Giordano, the letterer, the colorer, produced by Saul Harrison and assisted by Jack Adler, and some consulting editors were named here, including Mark Wolfman, if you take a look at that. All right, Julie Schwartz, Roy Thomas, and E. Nelson Bridwell. Now, as we start the story, we end up with the first prologue. And the first prologue was basically Superman, let me set this up a little bit better here, was Superman fighting against the robot. And as he fights against the robot goes ahead and steals a particular computer piece. All right. And at this time, if you may remember, Clark Kent was not a newspaper columnist anymore, but was working for the company headed by Max Lord that had bought the Daily Planet and was a communications conglomerate. And so Clark now was on television and an anchor for the news report. All right. So as we go on over here, Superman, of course, finds out where Luthor is, goes in there, attacks him, captures Luthor, and Luthor doesn't seem to really care about being captured too much, it seems. So he gets him, puts him in jail. And at the end, we see where we're going to get the connection here. We're here. Clark hurries to join his friends aboard an evening flight to New York. All right. And there was some convention of newspaper and television news people that he was attending. Interestingly, thereafter, there is, I guess they thought there might be some people who didn't know who Superman was. So they go through and they give a little bit of synopsis of Superman and his powers. Now, prologue number 2 is Spidey. And Spidey, he is here in New York. And he finds out he's sitting down there, getting his camera ready, because he was, of course, selling photos as Peter Parker to the Daily Bugle. And it looks like there are a bunch of people here, criminals, dressed almost like soldiers, that were invading a museum to steal some stuff. And he finds out here that it was Dr. Octopus that was behind it all. And so he goes ahead, usual type of stuff, good Spidey and Doc Ock fight. But at the end, as you might imagine, he wins out. He then goes ahead and gives J. Jonah Jameson the photos. Jonah Jameson is so excited about it, doesn't even look at the photos. He tells the guy, just run the best photo you can on page 1. He's being very kind to Peter, setting him up with a pillow and everything, very happy with the photographs. However, when it comes back, the camera must have moved, and all he's got is shadows. So J. Jonah Jameson goes bananas, of course, on Peter, tells him to get out. Now, Peter was supposed to meet MJ for a movie, but his spider sense goes off. He goes after it there, goes up on top of the Empire State Building. He sees a Goodyear blimp, but his spider sense is going crazy. He jumps through the blimp, and sure enough, there's Doc Ock and his octopus machine, whatever he called it at the time, and he finally gets him and puts him in jail. Then, just like with Superman, you've got a little bit of a synopsis of Peter. So in case you didn't know who Spider-Man was, you get to know a little bit about how he got his powers and, what his powers are and so forth. All right. Then prologue number 3 has Doc Ock in jail, his arms depowered, and Luther comes in. Luther determined as usual. Doc Ock seems to be upset. Luther goes ahead, talks to him, says, hey, don't worry about it. Take a look. He says, we're going to get out of here tomorrow. He says, oh, okay, I'll come along with you. So apparently Luther had put some false skin here with some, it looks like computer chips and so forth in there, is able to put something together that disables the guards and also powers up Doc Ock's arms, which allowed them to escape. Okay, so we got through the 3 prologues. So now we go into different parts of the story. In part 1, at the World News Conference in New York City, you have Doc Ock. Oh, first of all, we do have a little bit of a synopsis of the 2 of them. So you got the Duel of the Titans, Chapter 1. So here they are at that convention, right? And J. Jonah is still PO'd at Peter, and Peter actually tells him off, and he forgets about MJ. I don't know why MJ's sticking around with them. Not at the movies, forgets about him here, all right? But they end up getting together, and she says, it's great that you told him off finally. And so what happens, of course, is there's Clark and Lois. They're there as well. Max Lord is talking to somebody saying maybe we need to replace Clark with somebody like Walter Cronkite, who was the CBS anchor at the time, very famous. And Clark, just being meek and mild, doesn't do anything about it. They're whispering here between Lois and Clark Says, aren't you going to do something? Lois says, nah. Clark says, nah, I'm not going to do anything. So Lois gets annoyed at him. So she goes to find out some stuff, and goes up at the top here to see what's happening. And of course, Lois being Lois starts to fall, but who grabs her? Peter Parker. So Peter saves Lois. All right. And so they talk to each other here, get to know each other. And MJ sees that, shows up, and seems a little bit catty about the whole thing. Starting to tell Lois, hey, so you're a miss? What happened about woman's lib? And so forth. And seems a little bit jealous at this point in time, which makes some sense because Peter seems to forget about her and is hanging out with Lois. Anyway, so Superman shows up. And immediately vaporizes MJ and Lois, which makes Peter go bonkers. But there's Clark saying, what the heck? I must be losing my mind. Well, of course he's not losing his mind. We all know that that's somebody else, but he vaporized them. Oh no. So what happens? So Peter's asking where's the phone booth, which is kind of a play on the whole Superman thing, right? But he goes there and finds out there's no phone booth because they were taken care of. So he goes up to the roof, changes into Spider-Man, and goes up on the roof. Chapter 2 is actually where the fight occurs. And this was really, I have to say, a pretty well put together fight. The drawings by Ross Andrew, not necessarily Superman's face and whatever else, but the drawings and the setups were fantastic. You see a 2-page spread here, which was perfect for what's going on here. When heroes clash, he's there. It's like announcing it. It's right there. So Peter is really pissed off. And now, of course, you know that Superman could, bash Peter in 2 seconds. So let's see what happens. So Peter is very agile, kind of gets out of the way. And now you see down here that it was actually a buff, unless his suit had some foam in it, Lex Luthor, that actually was making believe he was Superman at the time. So Superman had heard about, I guess reading it in the Daily Bugle, that he wasn't too sure about Spider-Man, whether he was good or bad. So he wasn't sure whether Spider-Man might have had something to do with what happened to Lois and MJ. But, of course, Spider-Man can't fight Superman, so what does Luthor do? Luthor hits, which is kind of weird, but he hits Spider-Man with some sort of red sun ray. Instead, you would think he would hit Superman to depower him, but he hits Spider-Man, and somehow, I guess this was Jerry Conway's way of having fun, powers up Spider-Man. And so, for a while, boom! Look at that. Isn't that great? 1-pager. All right? The hits are larger, as you can see. So now Superman's not hurt, but he's bashed pretty hard, and so goes over. And here Spidey is saying, "Well, you're not half as tough as you think you are," and he's sitting around, hitting him around and saying, "What's going on? I thought this guy was tough. He's not really that tough. I don't understand it." Superman realizes something's going on, so he's trying to say, "I want to talk to you. Stop doing all of this." But Peter's so upset at what happened to MJ, he just doesn't want to hear it. So he's smashing Superman around. All right? So he keeps saying, "Well, I can't get over how easy this is. This guy is really overrated." But what happens? The red sun ray starts to wear off. So right here, Superman finally gets pissed off and says, "All right, I'm going to really hit him." But then he says, "What am I doing?" And he pulls back on his punch before he hits him. But the wind blast between that, when he pulled back, was so strong that the shock sends Peter clear. Another great shot. Look at this. Isn't that great? Sends Peter clear across the street. Yow! With the force of a compact hurricane. So Spidey goes boom in there. Superman comes, so Spidey goes through this place. Superman follows him up. Spidey's bouncing around. He still wants to hit him. Superman says, "Hey, listen to me." So when he hits Superman this time, guess what wears off? Thud. That red ray wore off. And so he doesn't realize it. So he's saying, "Spider-Man, listen to." So Spidey goes there, hits him, and says, "Boy, you've gotten hard so fast." This and this, I'm not going to mention more than they have been the subject of a number of memes. So Spidey's hitting him, nothing's happening, right? And he says, "I think I broke my hands." So I guess he had to. So Spidey decides to listen. He says, "I can't do anything else." So he listens to him. They realize they've been duped. They shake hands here, agree that they'll work together. Spidey, let's say, "Let's not shake hands again until after I get a titanium steel hand." Ouch, Okay. Chapter 3 is the call to battle. This is kind of interesting the way this works out. So I guess they find the headquarters of the super imposters. So Spidey goes in there first, and Spider's sense is getting in his way. Superman's just waiting outside. Spidey's going through an electrified wall, a hot thing, whatever else. Superman's just waiting there, says, "Okay, I think Spidey's done," and then he goes in and bashes in. If he went in there, nothing of this would have affected him, right? And when he gets in there, sure enough, they see Doc Ock and Lex Luthor. So they have a little tete-a-tete. Luthor shows that the two women are still alive. They're not dead. but they're being held for bait because they wanted them to come here. And when Spidey and Superman go to attack, they find out that they were really holograms projected there. So Spidey decides he's going to try to find out where the hologram transmission was coming from, but the computer was booby-trapped and blows up. All right. So Spidey says, well, there's nothing we can do now, but remember that Superman has super recollection, super memory, and apparently he could pull in to see what the computer was like, and amazingly puts it all together again. And Spidey, being kind of a computer geeky type of guy, figures out where it is. All right, Mount Kilimanjaro. So they go to Mount Kilimanjaro, and then kind of a weird thing. I don't know that they would do this today, but they go over there to Africa, I guess. And Superman says, let me handle it. These are the Maasai nomadic tribes. And he says, my friend and I have come from the sky seeking two evil men. One is a man with many arms, who? And some guy says, hey, you're Superman, aren't you? I saw photos of you when I studied in London. My name is Luke Chaka. Is there anything you need? I'm your man. So the guy just speaks to him in English. They figure out what's going on. He brings him to the chief. They find out that one of their warriors is missing, and they kind of know where he is. They bring him to there. Superman opens the thing up, and sure enough, there's the warrior, but he's been powered up by that red sun ray, apparently. And he's able to even, rip apart Spidey's webbing. Superman says, hey, I looked at your webbing beforehand, and I think if I could make it stronger. And so what happens is he uses, I guess, his heat vision, heats it up in some way, and the web becomes super strong. They're able to hold the guy there, and Nuchaka watches and makes sure he's okay. Supes and Spidey go inside. All right. And Chapter 4 is Doomsday Decision. All right. So they go inside. They look around. They happen to see that there's a rocket silo, and sure enough, they see that they were going to the Injustice Gang former headquarters, home sweet home. So when they get there is where we saw Lois and MJ. All right, and so they're talking about it, and apparently now the whole plan comes through. You see that Lex had this stolen programming circuit, as he called it. All right, and he's ready to put it in there and get his plan in place. Then we have a little bit of an interlude where we see J. Jonah Jameson actually speaking to Max Lord, each of them lamenting the problems they have. J. Jonah with Peter Parker and Max Lord with Clark Kent. And they go out into the city together. And sure enough, what they see is there's a launch of something called ComLab. And that really plays into what Lex has been doing. So he takes over ComLab with that little computer circuit, a computer chip, and says, hey, we've won. So he says, hey, we've won. That was the Alexa adding computer chip to my shopping list. I'll have to get it off later. So Supes finds out, they go there, and hey, look, Spider-Man knows how to fly a space craft of some kind. Superman gives him some kudos for doing that. And so what Lex is doing is he's shooting these lasers down into the ocean and basically starting some sort of super hurricane going on. The hurricane is building hurricane gales on Earth, messing up the ecology and all this. So at this time, they zap Superman, I guess, with that red sun thing finally. Spidey is blacking out, and they find themselves waking up in the Injustice headquarters, and apparently they are prisoners, I suppose, although I don't see anything on there, of Doc Ock and Lex. All right, going on, Lex, of course, as any good villain does, announces everything that he's willing to do, and so they decide to attack him. But no, it's not possible. Both were stunned groggy. All right. So what happens is Lex decides to turn off the gravity, which is kind of weird because that Superman's floating around like he should be able. He was flying in space before with no gravity, right? So now suddenly gravity hurts him, or he can't function in the no gravity in this space station, and so that enables Doc Ock to keep Superman away from him, and Spidey's webs don't work. All right. So as they go ahead, Superman and Spidey decide they're going to work together. All right. And as they work together, they are able to take care of Doc Ock, and Spidey takes care of Lex Luthor. All right. And unfortunately, Doc Ock gets his glasses back, but he can't see because they're broken. So there's a good shot right there. Spidey giving Lex a big hit. All right. So Spidey takes care of them, while Superman goes down trying to stop that initial burst. Still had this big tsunami and stuff going on there, big hurricane. So as Spidey finishes fighting up with them, Superman goes down in an attempt to stop it. Lex says it's too late. All right. And he says the world is going to be destroyed. And at that time, when he says that, the whole world is going to be destroyed because they, did me wrong. You have Doc Ock realizing, after Spidey says, you hear that? He's going to destroy the Earth. Where are you going to spend your loot? And Doc Ock says, dear Lord, he's mad. And says, I can't let you do that, Luthor. The Earth is my home too. So actually, Doc Ock destroys the programming module. And so Comlad's laser probe is no longer under his control. But there's that tsunami still coming. It says, goodbye, Boston. Goodbye, New York. Goodbye, Washington. All right. So Superman, though, flies down there, and we know he's going to save the day. He does some kind of a circular thing a few times around, and basically destroys the big tsunami type of wave. And then there's another pow on there, and there goes Luthor. All right, so it was all about Luthor's ego. So Soups and Spidey shake hands, say we'll see each other again, and there was a follow-up to this. All right, so they say, okay, Spidey, I'll see you, whatever. And the end, each bring their own criminal back to where they're going to bring him. So this is the end, but that wasn't really the end because there was an epilogue. And in the epilogue, you see that Pete got some great photographs. And Jay Jonah says, have dinner on me. Superman or Clark Kent actually got some video that he had set up. Max Lord is really happy and says, hey, we're not going to get Walter Cronkite, you're good. And he says, hey, go take Lane to dinner on me. And so what happens is they have a double date. All right? And so for tonight, they go out on a double date in New York, I guess. So that was the storyline. Okay, so now I promised you that we take a look and see how Carmen Infantino set it up. And the last page here does have the setup with some dialogue indicating how Carmen Infantino set up the cover in this way first. Then he put the background of the city with some skyscrapers. Then he switched to this down shot. And he said the thought was kind of the King Kong movie from the 1933. And then finally, the preliminary pencil sketch here. And the finished cover was Ross Andrew took it from there and created the finished pencils, which Dick Giordano inked. And again, we know that Neil Adams worked on Superman. All right. So it says here a true milestone in comics history, and of course it was. You can see here this particular edition has some of the glue kind of coming apart on this thing here, but it's still somewhat attached there. Okay. It's been 47 years since we thought it would never happen, but it did. And back in 1976, seeing it play out in the pages of this Treasury edition was simply amazing. Not because the story was the best ever, because there are so many better stories, but because to the fan, Superman versus The Amazing Spider-Man confirmed that the Marvel and DC worlds coexisted. The DC and Marvel heroes did in fact cross over a few times thereafter, but that, comic book guys and gals, will need to be left for another video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to watch my videos on my Silver Age Amazing Spider-Man collection here and here. Be well, and I'll see you soon.